Welcome to Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180 with your host Clay Kerner, and I'm Marty Pay. Clay, last week we had a great show with our own Congressman, Kevin McCarthy, the Majority Whip of the House, who is probably a very busy man this week for some strange reason with what's going on in Washington.
Something to do with budgets, I think.
Yeah, something to do with a little bit of money. Yeah, a little bit of a disagreement there between the...
I also noticed that Kevin was on Hannity the other night with just after our guest today was on recently.
Well, actually, we prepped Kevin for Hannity's show, and then Hannity was nice enough to prep our guest today for our show. So next week, we've got a great show with an old friend of mine, Michael Stern, who wrote a new book, I Had a Ball, My Relationship with Lucille Ball. So that's a great book, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking to him next week. But this week, we've got a fantastic lineup. Later in the hour, we have Bob Lowen to talk about that new campaign reform initiative, which you're going to hear a lot about between now and 2012. That's going to be an initiative on the ballot. So hopefully we'll have a lot of fun with Bob in about 20 minutes or so. But our guest in the first segment is the president and founder of the Media Research Center, author of 3 different books, a frequent guest on Fox News, and really one of the good guys, Brent Bozell. Brent, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Brent, I forgot the brightest star in your resume. You were given the honor of being a close second to Rush Limbaugh as the worst person in the world by Keith Olbermann one year.
Oh, no, I've gotten the worst of the world.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I've gotten it several times.
Congratulations.
I've been a runner-up several times, but I've won it several times as well. I'm very proud of that distinction.
Congratulations.
It took a lot of work. I want to thank my wife and my family, my children, and for my staff and everyone around me.
Well, I'm proud to be associated with you then.
Well, I understand he's a shoe salesman in Duluth now, isn't he, Keith Olbermann?
Remember that? What was that movie? What was it called? The one where the guys' heads turn around and they spin and they go popping off. It was one of those horror flicks.
One of those Exorcist movies?
You just knew that was going to happen to his career sooner or later, because it happens everywhere he goes. He just implodes or explodes.
Yeah, it's funny. About 20 years ago, I had a show in Los Angeles, and he and I were supposed to debate on something. He was on LA radio at the time, and for some reason it didn't come off, and I was really disappointed because I would love to have had about 20 minutes with him. That would have been fun.
Well, I would tell you, it's one of those great mythologies out there that the perception that the left tries to paint of people like Rush Limbaugh is that like so many conservatives, they're so mean-spirited and angry. And all you have to do is listen to his radio show, and he's laughing half the show, and he's cracking jokes, and he's a very personally he's a very genteel, genuine, lighthearted fellow. On the other hand, those on the left, you just scratch your head at people like Keith Olbermann and wonder, why do you have to be so angry? Why do you have to be so personal in your ad hominems? Why do you have to do that? Who was it that dropped you when you were a child? I just don't understand it. But the Bill Maher's and the Keith Olbermanns are just so angry at conservatives. They can't stand us being on the same planet.
Uh-huh. Speaking of people on the far left, did you happen to see Jon Stewart the other night? I saw it because it was on Facebook, but he was mocking Obama because of the so-called transparency in the administration, and I looked at that, I thought, hey, they're starting to eat their own right now.
They are. I think what's happening is that, by the way, they'll close the circle and they'll all be singing Kumbaya soon. But for right now, I think there is a sense of frustration with this administration, and it's interesting because it's the same frustration that ultimately developed between conservatives and the Bush administration. It wasn't just a disagreement on policy, but it was a disagreement on rapport. What you had with the Bush administration, but this is Bush 43, not Bush 41, you had a great sense of aloofness and a great sense of arrogance within that administration and the staff there, and toward anyone who might disagree with them. And there is the same kind of let them eat cake attitude being shown by the Obama administration and all of its supporters these days. So there is trouble in paradise.
Mm-hmm. We're having a conversation with Brent Bozell, the president and founder of the Media Research Center.
Brent, hi, this is Clay. I had a question regarding Mrs. Clinton. Do you think she's going to run for president this next election?
No, she won't. And I tell you, at the end of the day, I think she has, if she had a chance in 5 years, she has hurt herself dramatically with her handling of the Libya war situation. What a disaster. What an absolute disaster. People are saying, and it's absolutely correct, that never in our history has this country looked so inept, so disorganized. As George Will said, we don't have a plan B, we don't even have a plan A on this one. I think she hasn't been held accountable yet by the media. She deserves to be for the way she answered the question 2 Saturdays ago when this thing, or 3 Saturdays ago when this thing first hit. And the last question in a very long press conference was, which was carried live on CNN, was, Madam Secretary, what's America's interest in this war? And she gave this rambling 10-minute answer, which is, by the way, what one does when one doesn't have an answer. And she said there were 3 reasons. Reason number 1 was because Gaddafi used to be very bad towards the United States, and now is very bad towards his own people. Reason number 2 was because it could create a refugee problem for Libya's neighbors. Reason number 3 was because UN Resolution 1973 called for the world to do something. Not one of them is those answers answer the question. In other words, she couldn't answer why this was in America's best interest. She could understand why this was in Libya's interest that we do this, why this was in Libya's neighbors' interest that we do this, and why this was in France's interest that we do this, but not in what was America's interest. And she's the Secretary of Defense of State. So I think it's been just sheer ineptitude. So I think she's really hurt her case if she ever wants to run again.
Well, and you go back to Obama in 2007 when he was running for the presidency. He said the president does not have the power under the Constitution to unilaterally authorize a military attack in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or imminent threat to the nation.
You know what this administration is looking like more and more? Like it's run by a man who was a community organizer. You know, it is what we said all along. This is a team that's not ready for prime time. This is the game that couldn't shoot straight. These are people who react to things with Chicago-style street thuggery. I just read this piece in a London paper, just excoriating this administration in a liberal paper too, an editorial, but just pointing out all the insulting things that Obama has done personally against the leadership of Great Britain, which, by the way, has culminated in him not being invited to the royal wedding. But by the way, guys, let me ask you this question. If George Bush had, among other things, returned a bust of Winston Churchill to England as soon as he came to the Oval Office and done a series of other things which culminated in his not being invited to a royal wedding, don't you agree that story would lead every network news for night after night after night as a demonstration of how inept he was? And they would bring it up. Yep, and they would bring it up for the next 4 years. And there's virtually nothing of this being said about the Obama administration. I mean, it is a huge international scandal just how inept this man who was supposed to be the savior of the world, and the media had said he was such a rock star the world over. My goodness, how times have changed in 3 years. Incredible. You know, Brett, talking about Libya for a second, we had Gary Bernstein on in the studio by phone a couple of weeks ago, and Gary was the CIA chief in Afghanistan after 9/11. And this guy, I mean, what a hero. I mean, this guy, you know, he had a mission, he went after it, you know, he basically toppled the Taliban in 6 weeks and had bin Laden sitting in a corner. And you look at that kind of leadership, and now you look at what we're looking at now. I mean, there's no mission, there's no statement. I don't know. I mean, I have no great love for Gaddafi, but, you know, why are we there? What's the purpose? Are we supposed to get Gaddafi? What's the purpose in Afghanistan now? You know, that great book that Woodward wrote called Obama War, you know, pinned it down. I mean, there's no
real mission to speak of. What are we going to do in the Middle East?
My son, who just returned from Afghanistan, was visibly angered when I saw him the day that Obama announced that this was a kinetic military action. Said, my son, you tell that to a pilot who's got this ground surface air missiles being fired at him, who's got any anti-aircraft fire from the ground hitting all around him. Tell him it's just a kinetic military action. Tell him it's not a war. This is a war, and he's gotten this into another war. This is something the Arab League could have and should have handled. I just read today how in the last several years the dues to NATO have dropped by $61 billion among our friends who are no longer paying for defense because they know that we'll do it. 10 years ago, we were paying 50% of NATO's defense. We're now paying 75% of NATO's defense because they won't pay for it because they know that if push comes to shove, we'll do. We're like the old Mikey from the old Life cereal commercials. Don't worry about it, we'll do it. And so we're in Bosnia, we're in Libya, we're in one country after another when the neighbors should be taking care of it, not us.
You know, Brett, we pray for Obama every day. And one of the things Obama said the other day on TV, or maybe it was your article I looked at, is that he says he prays every night. And I just wonder who he's praying to.
Well, you know, I'm all in favor of prayer. I think prayer is a wonderful thing. But I like to have a greater discussion of prayer. I like to have a greater discussion of faith. I think it's amazing that this man is turning his back to all manner of anti-Christian genocide that's taking place. Look at the Middle East. Whether it's Christmas Day bombings in Baghdad, which supposedly is our ally, we save Egypt, we liberate Egypt, and what happens? They attack the Coptic Christians, and they're killing congregations all over Egypt, all throughout the rest of the Middle Eastern world. You're just getting one story after another of harassment, oppression, imprisonment, and even death being rained down on Christians and Jews in the Middle East. Where is the outrage of this man who prays every night? Why isn't he upset about that? He always seems to be upset about the ills befalling Muslims. Well, that's wonderful. What about the ills befalling Christians by Muslims?
Yeah, incredible. Brett, you know, I was doing some show prep for this, and I was looking at this thinking, oh, man, we could do an hour and a half with you with no problem. But and I appreciate your time today. I'm glad we were able to get the segment that we did. But your website, could you give your website before we close out the segment? Because there's so much great information. I was looking at townhall.com and looking at some of your articles. Is there another website that you'd like to give the folks just in case they want to look up some of your articles?
Well, if you go to mrc.org, from there you can get to all of our other websites like cnsnews.com or newsbusters.org or the Business and Media Institute or the Culture and Media Institute. But just go to mrc.org, and from there you can start trolling around. Okay.
Brett, thank you so much for the time. I really, really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back on if we could.
My pleasure. I'm happy to do it.
Thank you, Brent. We've just had a conversation with Brent Bozell, the president and founder of Media Research Center, and we will be back in a minute on Taking Care of Business on Kern Radio Newstalk 1180.